Hello, friends. We are back again doing Wit and Wisdom. We're going to do lesson 27. So let's get started. Let me get my screen fixed for us. All right. So let's talk. What are the Cinderella story elements in the Korean Cinderella? Well, we know we have good characters, evil characters, magical elements, and proof of identity. So let's look at these pages and see if we can figure out who the good character is. Goodness. So if I look at page 4, both the tree and the child grew lovelier with each passing season. In spring, white flowers frosted the tree, and Pear Blossom wore a white ribbon on her long black braid. In summer, when the tree bent with ripening fruit, Pear Blossom's mother wove a band of rosy gold into her hair. In the autumn, when leaves from the tree blew about the courtyard like scraps of sunshine, her mother dressed Pear Blossom in a yellow gown. But one winter day, when the branches on the pear tree were still bare, the old woman died. So, who is the good character there? It's Pear Blossom, isn't it? Okay, let's see if we can find the evil characters. Let's look at page 8. Amoni found fault as soon as she stepped into the kitchen. Too cold, she grumbled. The fire's gone out. Fetch wood, Pear Blossom, be quick. Pear Blossom gathered sticks and fed the stove until the lid on the kettle danced from the steam. Too hot, her stepmother scolded then. The noodles are scorching. Get water, Pear Blossom, be quick. Both Amoni and Peony were jealous of Pear Blossom, and the harder she worked, the happier they were. So, who's the evil characters there? Peony and Amoni, right? Okay, let's see if we can figure out the magical element here. Let's go to page 14. A Tokugawa, Pear Blossom gasped. A goblin. What if a Tokugawa goblin were hiding in the jar? Fearfully, she stood on tiptoe and peered inside. A gigantic frog with bulging eyes stared back. So what's the magical element there? Is the Togabi or Tokugawa? And that is a frog, isn't it? Okay. Well, let's look at page 18 to see if we can figure out the magical element. The next morning, Amoni scattered a huge sack of rice around the courtyard. Hold this rice, little pig, she ordered. Polish every grain, or else. She shook the empty bag. You'll be put in the sack and sent to China. Then Amoni and Peony left for the village. Rice covered the ground like sand beside the sea. Pear Blossom threw her arms around the pear tree and asked, will none in this world help me? Wings whirred overhead, and a flock of sparrows flew out of the tree. Cheer, cheer, the sparrows called to Pear Blossom. They pecked at the rice, separating husk from kernel. In a matter of minutes, the sparrows had polished the rice and piled it in the corner. So what's the magical element there? It's the sparrows, right? All right, and let's look at 22. Pigling may go, said Amoni in a voice as sweet as barley sugar. After she weeds the rice paddies, she handed Pear Blossom a basket of wilted turnip tops. Here is Pigling's picnic. I am most grateful, honorable mother, said Pear Blossom. When she reached the fields, Pear Blossom dropped the basket in dismay. Rice rippled before her like a great green lake. Weeding it would take weeks. Who could do such a task? Suddenly, a whirlwind twisted through the fields, and a huge black ox reared up from the cloud of dust. Doo, it bellowed, tossing its great horns, and the ox began to munch the weeds, moving through the rows faster than the wind itself. So what's the magical element there? It's the ox, isn't it? So the proof of identity. Let's look and see if we can figure that out on page 36. I've lucky enough if she who wears this one becomes my bride. Pear Blossom smiled, too shy to speak, and slipped the sandal on her foot. Amoni stood staring, stiff as a clay statue, but Peony ran straight to the rice fields to find the magic ox. All she saw was a glimpse of its hood, and it galloped away. So what's the proof of identity there? It's her sandal, isn't it? Okay. So let's move on. So our focus question is, why do people admire Adelita and Pear Blossom? Our content framing is, how does the Korean Cinderella build my knowledge? So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to build our knowledge. And then how many different versions of Cinderella stories do you think there are? Think about that. Well, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to see if you can figure it out from later in the slides, because you're going to find out, okay? So let's move on. So we're going to do our knowledge journal, what I know and what I can do. So what are things that we know from these Cinderella stories? Well, I know that there are different versions of Cinderella stories, isn't there? I also know that each Cinderella story that we've read, their story elements are similar. So story elements are similar. And I believe also that people admire Cinderella because she's a good person. Okay, so let's talk about what we can do. What can we do? Well, I know that we can write an introduction to an opinion paragraph. And also write a conclusion, can't I, for an opinion paragraph. All right, so there's knowledge journal. Goodness, let me get a drink. Okay, so let's erase and move on. All right, so today we're going to read 900 Cinderella stories. Okay, and I want you to choose either Cinderella, Adelita, or the Korean Cinderella to compare to this handout that I'm getting ready to read. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. Let me move that. Here we go. 900 Cinderellas. And it says, listen carefully as your teacher reads an excerpt from the article 900 Cinderellas. And it says signal when you hear information that connects to or is the same as the other Cinderellas you've read. So you think about one of the Cinderella stories, okay, that we talked about there. You can compare it to Adelita Cinderella or the Korean Cinderella, okay? So this is an excerpt from 900 Cinderellas. If someone asked you to name a fairy tale everyone knows, chances are you might say Cinderella. But did you know that the story of Cinderella is found all over the world in many different cultures? In China, she is known as Yi Xin. In Appalachia, she is called Ashpet. Native Americans know her as Little Burnt Face. No matter what she is called, Cinderella is always beautiful and good. Sadly, other members of her family are jealous of her goodness and beauty. They're cruel to her. She is made to wear rags and do the worst chores in the household. But then a mad person comes to help her. Dressed in beautiful clothes, Cinderella meets a prince or a king who wants to marry her. But she is forced to run away from him and wear her rags again. In the end, he finds Cinderella after she proves her ability through a special test. Remember the glass slipper? He put it on and then she brought out her other one, right? Then they marry and live happily ever after. Now, around the world, there are more than 900 different versions of this story, but they all follow the same basic plot. So do you remember that question I asked you back at the beginning? How many Cinderella stories do you think there are? Well, now we know there are over 900. That's a lot, isn't it? Wow. Okay. So let's get back to our screen. I'm going to stop sharing. Let me fix my screen again. All right. So what are some things that are the same in the article and the story we chose to compare it? Well, there's always a good character and there's always a bad character, isn't there? And in the end, they always live happily ever after, but there's also a proof of identity in all the stories. Okay, let's move on. So let's look at our learn. Let's look at our learn. How do I improve writing an introduction? Well, let's look at this. Revising an introduction. You read the introduction, you underline the introduction. If the introduction doesn't include the title of the book, write a new introduction to include it. Okay, so we know the introduction needs to include the title of the book. Use the classroom resources to help with spelling. All right, so let's look at this paragraph that we have up here on the board. We read about Pear Blossom. I admire Pear Blossom because she is helpful. She sews dresses for her stepsister. That is why Pear Blossom is helpful. Now, let's think about this. I want you to help me with the revision process by helping me go through steps. All right. And I'm going to use the resource, which is our book, because books can be resources too. So I can write the title of the book correctly, because I'm going to revise the introduction using the following sentence frame. Blank is a character in the story. Okay, so what can I put here in this blank? We'll put Pear Blossom, because that's the character. Pear Blossom is a character in the story. What story is she from? The Korean Cinderella. And I've got the book, so I know that I can spell it correctly. Okay. Now, notice also, because they are special names, they are capitalized. Pear and Blossom and Korean and Cinderella. So now we have revised our introduction to read Pear Blossom is a character in the story. So we can take that sentence right here away. And we can continue. I admire Pear Blossom because she is helpful. She sews dresses for her stepmother and stepsister. That is why Pear Blossom is helpful. So remember, when you're writing a story, always start it with a character in the story of what? Okay, that would be your introduction. So our essential question is, why do people around the world admire Cinderella? Our content framing, how does the Korean Cinderella build my knowledge? So what did you learn the number of Cinderella stories told throughout the world from reading 900 Cinderellas? Well, I learned that there are a lot more versions of Cinderella than I thought. I didn't think there were more than 900, did you? Because that's quite a bit. All right, fluency check-in. So let's do our fluency homework, friends. Let me bring my chair back over here, and that way we'll share my screen. Where's my mouse? I'm always losing it. And let me get this taken care of, and let's see if I can find fluency. Okay, our fluency. Moni found fault as soon as she stepped into the kitchen. Too cold, the fire's gone out. Fetch wood, Pear Blossom, be quick. Pear Blossom gathered sticks and fed the stove until the lid on the kettle danced from steam. Too hot, the noodles are scorching. Get water, Pear Blossom, be quick. Both Moni and Peony were jealous of Pear Blossom, and the harder she worked, the happier they were. Each day, Pear Blossom was up before the sun. She cooked and cleaned until midnight with only the crickets for company. Okay, let's look at the second one. Option B. Moni found fault as soon as she stepped into the kitchen. Too cold, the fire's gone out. Fetch wood, Pear Blossom, be quick. Pear Blossom gathered sticks and fed the stove until the lid on the kettle danced from steam. Too hot, the noodles are scorching. Get water, Pear Blossom, be quick. Both Moni and Peony were jealous of Pear Blossom, and the harder she worked, the happier they were. Each day, Pear Blossom was up before the sun. She cooked and cleaned until midnight with only the crickets for company. But nothing could hide Pear Blossom's beauty. At night, Moni lay sleepless, searching for an excuse to get rid of her stepdaughter. Wow, that's sad, isn't it? And I think I say that every time we read that. Okie dokie. Let's move on. So our deep dive. Let me fix my screen again. Says, how do I use resources to help me spell my words in my writing. So what resources can you use to help spell words correctly in your writing? Well, if you were in a classroom, you could use your word wall or the books that you have. But in this case, you're at home, you may have to use a dictionary. You use your computer to look up words also. But more than likely, if you are doing some writing, you could use the text. So let's look. Orally rehearse a sentence about pear blossom. So I'm going to give you a sentence about pear blossom. We're going to look at it, okay? It says, Pear Blossom was happy with her mother and father. So not every word that you want to spell comes from resources, but many important ones do. So if I didn't know how to spell those words, I would look them up in my book, okay? All right. It says you can share your writing with other students, but you don't have to write anything down on that one, okay, guys? So I am saying that is it. Deep dive. So I will see you back here tomorrow, friends. Have a great afternoon.